Hey, everyone. Ever feel like, you're on autopilot? Like you keep reacting to things in ways that you later regret?
Oh, yeah.
You're not alone.
Yeah.
You asked for a deep dive on emotional immaturity.
Okay.
And we're going deep with this blog post from Start Sarah called Understanding Emotional Immaturity.
Mm-hmm.
The author is a psychologist and a coach, so they know what they're talking about.
Sure.
And get this.
Yeah.
They say most of us were never taught how to be emotionally mature.
Really?
And the fallout from that is the average person
Wow.
spends 2 hours a day dealing with the consequences of their emotional reactions.
Huh.
So we're talking relationship stress, career setbacks,
Yeah.
even just that feeling of being stuck.
Hmm.
So are you ready to break free from that cycle?
Totally.
Let's get started.
Let's do it. It's amazing how much emphasis we put on academics and practical skills.
Right.
But emotional intelligence kind of gets left behind.
Totally.
It's like we're expected to figure it out as we go along.
Right.
But actually, emotional maturity isn't about being stoic or emotionless.
Right.
It's about understanding and managing your emotions effectively.
Okay, so what exactly does it mean to be emotionally immature?
Right.
The blog defines it as?
Having difficulty regulating your emotions, which leads to
Okay.
behaviors that, prioritize your immediate needs above the long-term well-being of yourself or others.
Okay.
And they give these great examples,
Okay.
contrasting a day one scenario with a day two scenario.
Okay. Yeah. Those examples really highlight the difference. Like on day one,
Yeah.
imagine you get feedback at work and you immediately get defensive.
Mhm.
And then later on, a small misunderstanding with your partner turns into a huge fight.
Yeah.
And by the end of the day, you're so drained, you avoid a challenging project altogether. It's like every interaction becomes this uphill battle.
Oh, I think we've all had those day one kind of days.
Right.
But then they paint this picture of day two where the emotionally mature person takes the feedback in stride, communicates calmly with their partner,
Yeah.
tackles that tough project strategically.
It's like night and day, right?
Totally.
And what's really interesting is
Yeah.
the blog points out these three main causes of emotional immaturity.
Okay.
And they often stem from things that are totally outside of our control.
Wow.
They talk about childhood experiences like
Okay.
having overprotective parents or a lack of emotional support early on.
It makes you think. Right.
Totally.
If no one modeled healthy emotional expression for you,
Yeah.
how are you supposed to know how to do it?
Exactly. And it's not just about our upbringing.
Right.
Cultural influences play a role too.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how individualistic societies often prioritize personal ambition and success.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a bad thing in itself, but it can sometimes unintentionally breed a sense of self-centeredness
Yeah.
that hinders emotional growth.
Interesting.
So it's like we're conditioned to put ourselves first,
Uh-huh.
which can make it harder to develop those empathy muscles.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this mind-blowing point that the blog makes.
What's that?
We spend years learning algebra, history,
Yeah.
but who actually teaches us how to handle disappointment,
Right.
rejection, or how to navigate difficult emotions?
It's so true. We're practically set up
Yeah.
to struggle with this stuff.
Right.
But here's the good news.
Sure.
You can absolutely learn and grow emotionally, even if you weren't taught these skills early on.
That's encouraging. Okay. But how do we even know if we're emotionally immature? What are the signs?
Well, the blog breaks it down into 6 common signs,
Okay.
but instead of listing them all out,
Yeah.
let's group them into themes to make it easier to digest.
Oh, I love that. That makes it much easier to remember.
So the first group is all about communication and empathy. Think about that friend who always turns the conversation back to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They may struggle to truly listen or offer support because they're so focused on their own experience.
Yeah.
It's like you're talking to a wall, right?
Ugh, yes.
Yeah.
I think we all know someone like that. It's like they haven't quite mastered the art of taking other people's perspective.
Exactly. And then there's that whole responsibility piece.
Okay.
This shows up in that classic blame-shifting move. Someone forgets something important and instantly hits you with, well, you didn't remind me.
Oh, the blame game. It's
Yeah.
like their go-to defense mechanism to avoid any accountability.
Right. And it can be incredibly frustrating because it prevents any real problem solving from happening.
Totally.
And speaking of frustration, another big sign is difficulty regulating emotions. Picture this. You're having a calm conversation and suddenly the other person explodes over something minor. You're left wondering how things escalated so quickly.
Okay. Those examples really bring it to life.
Mm-hmm.
But you said there were 6 signs, right?
Yeah.
What are the other three?
Right. So we've got that first cluster of signs, trouble with communication and empathy and taking responsibility. Now let's move on to the second group, which is all about intimacy and vulnerability and conflict.
Okay, this is getting interesting. Tell me more.
Well, imagine someone who always keeps the conversation superficial. They avoid deep or serious topics like the plague, especially when it comes to their own feelings. It's like they're terrified of letting anyone truly see them.
Yeah.
That's a sign of a fear of intimacy and vulnerability.
I can see how that would be a major roadblock in building any meaningful relationships.
Right. And then there's that all too familiar feeling when you try to address a conflict, but the other person just shuts down or walks away.
Yeah.
It's like they'd rather sweep things under the rug than actually engage in a productive conversation.
Oh, I don't want to talk about it move.
Right.
It's so frustrating because it just prolongs the issue and prevents any real resolution.
Exactly. And this inability to handle conflict constructively can show up in all sorts of ways.
Yeah.
From passive-aggressive behavior to full-blown meltdowns.
So we've got communication and empathy, responsibility, and now intimacy, vulnerability, and conflict. Was that final sign we're missing?
Ah, yes. The last one might be the most relatable.
Okay.
It's that constant need for immediate gratification. Think about that impulse by you regret.
Oh, yeah.
Or that feeling of needing to check your phone every 5 minutes. It's about prioritizing short-term pleasure over long-term goals.
Oh, I'm definitely guilty of this one sometimes.
Yeah.
But why is that a sign of emotional immaturity?
Well, it's not that enjoying things or indulging yourself is inherently bad.
Right.
It's more about the inability to delay gratification or consider the bigger picture.
Okay.
Emotionally mature people can still enjoy those things, but they're also able to prioritize their responsibility, make thoughtful decisions, and resist those impulsive urges when needed.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've got these 6 signs of emotional immaturity, but the blog emphasizes that simply recognizing them is actually a sign of growth.
Totally.
It's like the first step towards making a change.
It's so true. It's not about beating yourself up for your shortcomings, but rather seeing them as opportunities for learning and development.
I love that.
But here's the thing. The blog doesn't just leave us hanging with a list of problems.
Okay.
They actually delve into the impact of emotional immaturity on relationships, which can be pretty profound.
Okay, let's talk about that. What kind of impact are we talking about?
Well, imagine constantly feeling lonely in a relationship, even when you're physically together, or experiencing conflict after conflict with no real resolution in sight. It can lead to a feeling of emotional drain, like you're constantly giving, but not receiving the same in return.
That sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
And I can see how those patterns would eventually wear down even the strongest of bonds.
Exactly. And the blog makes it clear that this isn't just about romantic relationships.
Right.
Emotional immaturity can impact friendships, family dynamics, even professional relationships.
It's like a ripple effect that touches every aspect of our lives.
It really is. But before we get too doom and gloom, let's shift gears and talk about the distinction that the blog makes between emotional immaturity and narcissism.
Right.
It's an important one because they can sometimes look similar on the surface.
Yeah.
But the underlying motivations and impact are actually quite different.
Okay, this is interesting. I'm ready to unpack this.
So think about it this way. Emotionally immature people often act out of fear, insecurity, or simply a lack of self-awareness.
Okay.
They might come across as selfish or inconsiderate, but it's often because they just don't know any better.
Right.
Or haven't developed the skills to do things differently.
It's like they're operating from a limited emotional toolkit, not necessarily from a place of malice.
Exactly. But with narcissism, there's a much deeper and more calculated motivation at play.
Right.
It's about maintaining a sense of superiority and control, even if it means manipulating or exploiting others to get there.
Wow.
It's not just about being selfish, it's about a fundamental lack of empathy.
So with emotional immaturity, there's the potential for growth and change.
Yeah.
Whereas narcissism is more of an ingrained personality trait.
That's what the blog suggests. And this difference in motivation really shows up in how each one impacts relationships.
Okay.
With emotional immaturity, it can definitely create challenges and frustrations.
Yeah.
But with effort and willingness to work on those behaviors, relationships can absolutely heal and evolve.
That's reassuring to hear.
Yeah.
So there is hope for those of us who might be a little emotionally immature.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing those patterns
Right.
and being willing to put in the work to change them.
Yeah.
But with narcissism, the blog paints a much bleaker picture.
Okay.
They describe these relationships as toxic and often highly damaging,
Right.
with very little likelihood of genuine change.
Because at the core, there's that lack of empathy and that constant need for control, which makes genuine connection nearly impossible.
You got it. And the blog goes on to break down the difference in self-esteem.
Okay.
Emotionally immature people often struggle with low self-esteem and insecurities,
Yeah.
which can lead to clingy or dependent behaviors.
Which can put a lot of pressure on the other person in the relationship.
Exactly. But with narcissists, it's almost the opposite.
Right.
There's often an inflated sense of self-importance and a need to project an image of perfection.
Right.
It's all about maintaining that facade, even if it means belittling or devaluing others in the process.
So it's not about genuinely feeling good about themselves. It's about appearing that way to the outside world.
Precisely. And all of these distinctions are important to keep in mind because they can really help us understand the dynamics at play in our relationships.
It's not about labeling people.
Right.
It's more about having that awareness so we can make informed decisions about who we let into our lives and how we navigate those relationships.
Okay, so we covered a lot. The signs, the impact, even that difference between emotional immaturity and narcissism.
It's a big one.
But I'm ready for the hopeful part.
Okay.
What can we actually do about all of this? The blog wouldn't just leave us hanging without some solutions, would they?
You're absolutely right. They wouldn't. And they offer these really practical techniques, almost like tools to your emotional toolkit.
Okay, I like that.
And the best part, they're simple, no fancy retreats or anything like that.
Okay, lay it on me. I'm ready to upgrade my toolkit. What have you got?
All right. Remember that 60-second pause we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
It's seriously a game changer.
Okay.
It's about hitting the brakes before you react,
Right.
especially when emotions are running high.
Yeah.
In that moment, 1 minute can feel like forever, but it gives you space to breathe, notice what you're feeling.
And choose a better response.
Okay, that makes sense. But does it really work? Like, is that 1 minute really going to make a difference?
Think of it like building a muscle, but for your emotional regulation.
Okay.
The blog says by practicing this pause consistently, you can actually rewire your brain over time. You'll become less reactive and way more resilient in the face of stress.
Okay, I'm sold.
Yeah.
What's the next tool in this toolkit?
All right, this one is fantastic for putting things into perspective, the reality check question. Will this matter in 5 years?
I love this one. It's so easy to get caught up in like the little annoyances of life.
Totally.
But this question really helps you zoom out and see the bigger picture.
Exactly. Suddenly, that spilled coffee or that frustrating email doesn't seem so earth-shattering. It's like mental decluttering for your emotional well-being.
Okay, so true. Last but not least, what was that technique that was backed by neuroscience? I'm all about the science. Ah, yes, the emotion naming game. Remember how we were talking about how simply naming your feeling can actually reduce its intensity by up to 50%?
Yeah. It seemed almost too good to be true. How does that work?
It's like you're shining a light on that emotion, bringing it from the shadows of your subconscious into the awareness of your conscious mind. And by putting a label on it, whether it's anger, sadness, frustration, you're actually activating the thinking part of your brain, which helps dial down that initial emotional surge.
So instead of getting swept away by that wave of emotion, you're able to kind of ride it with a little more control. I love that.
And the blog emphasizes that while each of these techniques is powerful on its own, they work best when combined.
Okay.
Think of them as different ingredients in a recipe for emotional maturity.
So it's not about finding the one magic bullet.
Right.
It's about creating a holistic approach that works for you.
You got it. Start small, celebrate those little wins, and remember, it's a journey, not a race. Progress over perfection, right? But here's the thing that really stuck with me. That statistic the blog mentioned, about 75% of workplace conflicts stemming from emotional immaturity. If that many problems are rooted in this, imagine the impact. if we all just got better at handling our emotions.
Right. Think about those ripple effects, not just at work,
Yeah.
but in our personal lives too.
Yeah.
Less drama,
Yeah.
more understanding, stronger connections.
Yeah.
It's all possible.
It really makes you think. So as we wrap up this deep dive on emotional immaturity, here's a question for you to ponder.
Right.
Now that you've learned about these signs, are there any patterns that you recognize in your own life?
It's not about judgment, it's about awareness. That's the first step towards growth.
Totally.
And remember, the blog also recommends checking out their Inner Peace Journal and this podcast for even more tools and insights.
Yeah, great suggestions. We'll link those in the show notes. And hey, even if you just take away one thing from this deep dive, remember, emotional maturity is a journey, and even small steps forward can make a huge difference in your life and the lives of those around you. Thanks for joining us.